Hi, everyone, and thanks again for joining me for another one of my YouTube Podbean podcast, whatever you want to call it, things on my GaudiMitspes22.com blog. And today, hopefully, let's say a quick prayer that the internet gods will be smiling on us because we are doing a four-person Zoom link from my farm's sketchy internet. So we'll see if it hangs on. Two of the guests today, you guys have seen before on my channel, Dr. Rodney Howsare. I feel like this is like on the Brady Bunch thing here with the sort of, all the pictures. But the thing is, Rodney's a professor of theology at DeSales University, chair of the department, at least for now. You know the drill. People know Rodney. Adrian Walker down below, professor of theology at St. Patrick's Seminary, Menlo Park, California, which is near San Francisco. I'm hoping to be there next
Correct.
spring.
Great.
But the guest of honor, which Adrian suggested to me a few months ago, the guest of honor is Dr. Conor Cunningham. Many of you probably know Conor. I could go on and read to you a lengthy list of Conor's many credentials that would take about 5 to 10 minutes. He is a brilliant guy. He is currently associate, unless it's been updated, associate professor of theology, faculty of arts at the University of Nottingham in theology in the UK. I remember I did once. I showed a video to my science and religion class that I taught to undergraduates for many years. Was I think the video was called "Did Darwin Kill God?" that you did with the BBC, Conor, and I that was great. The only two videos I showed routinely were from the BBC. One was yours. One was one by Roger Scruton
Oh yeah.
called "Why Beauty Matters." Why Beauty
Also very good.
Matters, in Scruton's inscrutable way. And anyway, Connor is also a prolific writer and publisher, studied under Milbank and then Graham Ward and a bunch of other. But one of his areas of expertise that most interests us here today is in the science and religion, science and theology. And the topic of today's conversation, once again, I never script these things, mainly because I'm really lazy. But the topic today is the nature of modern science and its sort of role in the university. That's very generic, very open ended. But Conor, do you have anything you want to add to your biography before I turn it over to you to sort of give a sort of brief introduction to what you think the nature of modern science is?
I don't care about my biography. The first thing I'd say is I don't like the description science and religion. That's part of the problem.
Bingo. Yes.
Yeah, because the and is the abyss, and it will suck in anything with integrity or validity or depth on either side of the equation, if you like. The science and the religion will both be straw, simulacrum, if you like. And the only thing which will dominate is the and. So like theology and film, theology and nature, theology and whatever. It's the and that dominates. What you want is a theology of film, a theology of nature, a theology of sport, a theology of cooking, like Babette's Feast. You don't. The and is the abyss. It sucks everything in and nothing gets out
Oh, I
except
couldn't.
assembling.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, and I'll turn it over to Rodney and Adrian to pursue some questions as well. I once got a grant from the Templeton Foundation to do science, religion-y kind of stuff. And I remember I'd go to all of these conferences at St. Anne's College, Oxford, dealing with science and religion sorts of things. And that always bothered the heck out of me. It always seemed like trying to pound square pegs into round holes. I even coined the phrase the Templeton paradigm to describe the kind of conversation that was taking place that seemed to do violence to both the science and the theology and the thing is it left us with almost nothing except the kind of pablum of Anglican deistic rationalism. uh, and so I was left. The only reason I went is because I liked Oxford and it gave me a free trip to Oxford. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there. I agree with that assessment. To that end, Rodney, do you have any sort of questions you want to lead in with here?
No, I mean, I just think that's an interesting way to begin it, is to call into question the very
Right.
the way the whole thing is set up in the first place, right? And it seems to me that Yeah, I mean, just the word religion is so ambiguous in itself, and it's like Conor said, it when it's used, even like you say, what's the difference between theology and religion or whatever, you're already saying something about religion that is already loaded in a variety of ways. And I think it's just that Socratic moment where you stand back and you say, wait a second, before we start this, what is science? What is religion? What is theology? Because that's what we never do. We start having the conversation without ever establishing in advance what these things even mean and how complicated it is to define them. We act as if it's an easy thing to say, oh, let's talk about the relationship between science and religion, as if we understand already in advance what these things mean, which I don't think we do.
Right. And we also assume that they're sort of originally separate, and it's up to us to sort of bring them together in that abyssal space, supposedly in the middle, right? Which Conor was talking about just now.
Yeah, it's good.
And you said set up. I think they're set up to fail.
Yeah.
You want to
word religion? Yeah, they're set up to fail because, as I said, they're simulacrum. But the point is, even the word religion, Rodney's talking about that. I mean, religion just means to bind, right? So it's a functional thing. So football could be a religion. So, soccer, baseball, if it binds people together, anything which binds is therefore functionally religion. But you can have a theology of religion, I suppose.
Yes.
I suppose that might work. Yeah. But left to itself, in the way you were just saying, I think it's there be dragons.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think Adrian's point, rather than coming, no offense to him, Ronner, or an Aryan point where you have separate stuff and then trying to stick it together, it's better to start off with union and differentiate into Lubacian sense. And I think that, and first of all, I just say about science, I'm a nominalist when it comes to science as a term. I'm not a nominalist when it comes to sciences. So, as an umbrella term, I don't believe science exists at all anywhere in the world. I do believe chemistry exists. I do believe biology exists. I do believe physics exists, high and low, and all this sort of stuff. I don't believe in science, just like I don't believe in religion. So I don't really want to try and waste my time writing about two things I don't believe exist. I'm a nominalist about both.
Right.
I mean, you have to remember.
The
word, Adrian knows this. I'm sure you all know this. The word scientist was only coined in 1833.
Wow.
So in 1832, there were no scientists. And I mean, Darwin, for example, he refused it until he died. And it became popular for funding purposes, really, in demarcation around the First World War for strategic reasons. They were all natural philosophers up to there, and I think they should be moving back to that, because the word scientist is nonsense, and science as an umbrella term, sure, but only nominally.
Right. And
go ahead, Adrian. Go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
go ahead, Rodney.
I was just going to say that it's the same as the exact thing with religion, right? It was 18 whatever that Western Europeans went over and told Hindus that they were Hindus and they were practicing a religion, right? And they didn't have a word to equate with religion. They didn't, there was nothing in their languages that would mean the same thing. So it's very similar, it seems to me. Science is a modern invention. Religion is a modern invention, at least the way we use the words now.
Yeah, and I mean that I was just going to say that something analogous applies to the notion of scientific method. I mean, this is not an original point that I'm making at all, but it's pertinent to the discussion. There is no sort of one size fits all scientific method. They're just a bunch of people in different guilds that are having conversations around trying to figure stuff out together. And then they come up with all kinds of ways of doing that. I'm not going to say that no unity is revealed there, but the unity is going to be revealed through the plurality of the practices, not through a kind of one size fits all that sort of drops down from somewhere, right?
Well, yeah, I would say, go ahead, Conor.
No, I just think Adrian's bang on there. I mean, I think unity is discovered, it can't be a priori. as a method. Here we are, univocal method, monolithic method, which is applicable everywhere. It's just a fiction.
Right.
And the unity arises by the nature of discovery.
Exactly.
Where chemistry comes into its own almost after the fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which is very reassuring, right? Because this is one of many, many, many signs that there's actually a common world that makes itself known in all kinds of ways. I mean, to us and through us.
Yeah. Any disciplined form of knowledge, its method is going to be determined by the nature of its object, right? And so obviously there are going to be a multiplicity of objects that various disciplines are going to study, even on this umbrella fiction called science. So yeah, and so I sometimes wonder if the common denominator, beyond simply they all are in the process of trying to discover things, if there is a sort of common denominator in the modern consciousness of what creates this essentialized thing we call science, it is on the plane of philosophy. I think that they all evince what we look at and call science is simply a multiplicity of different disciplines with a multiplicity of objects bonded together by a common naturalistic philosophy, a common set of secular, naturalistic, reductionistic philosophical assumptions.
I mean, go ahead, Connor. I was going to point in your direction anyway, but go ahead.
Just a quick point there. I don't think that's quite right, in that it's got to such a degree that science is bootstrapping itself to the point it doesn't have an object. It's abandoned the object.
Right.
So there isn't actually a to and fro, any relationship. So for example, if you say science always has an object, well, I don't think anyone's bumped into a string in string theory.
Yeah.
In fact, they self-consciously have eschewed empirical methods, back to Adrian's point.
Right.
And they don't see that as a loss. And there's a huge debate over this historically. Adrian and I've talked about it, but it's amazing. There is no object. What they do, a bit like Dungeons and Dragons or Sudoku, is it has to be internally self-consistent.
Right. Exactly.
And they think, oh, bingo. But they haven't, there's no rubber touch the road.
Yeah.
So I have to listen to politics programs all the blooming time. And they get some panel on, they go, well, but it's science. And I'm pulling my hair out going, what science? What do you mean by that? Right. And our so-apparent intelligent politicians and so forth haven't a clue, because no one actually looks at it. And what science cleverly does these days, especially for funding streams of funding and so forth, is that they thicken their brand. And what I mean by that, thick description, Gilbert Ryle's phrase, made famous by Clifford Geertz, but the cultural anthropologist, but to thicken the brand. It's like the way if I say the word Beatles to you, the Beatles, you don't think of insects, you think of a pop group, right? So the Beatles that disappeared, the insects that disappeared is a brand that's thickened. And so we'll have scientists use things, and that fools us into thinking there's an object. They'll talk about quantum fields, right? Exactly. No one has ever anywhere in the world given a mathematically consistent definition of a quantum field. But we all think there's quantum fields. Now, I'm all for quantum field theory. I'm not against it. But what I'm against is our naivete and thinking I can kick it down the road. I can't. There is no object. There are tools which are constructed, which may be applicable in analytical terms, which may then reveal something about the world.
Right.
But I think there's something very interesting happening, which Adrian and I talked about before, happening with these string theories and loop quantum gravity and all this sort of thing, is that they're having to come back down to Earth otherwise they get their P45. Do you know what a P45 is?
No.
British thing.
Yeah, it's when you're fired, you can lose your job, you get your P45. Right.
Oh,
right. So string theory is getting its P45 because it's had more funding than anything else in history.
Yeah,
and it's come up with least.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
There ain't no object. And I'll give you a rundown in the history in a minute if you want, but I'll let Adrian in there. So.
Well, no. I was just gonna sort of, append a footnote to that. This is great, by the way. I mean, Connor and I talk a lot, but we don't usually Zoom. We usually do it through email. So it's nice to actually, see your face, if you can call this seeing. I mean,
Has Zoom, I'm going to interrupt, Adrian. Has Zoom become a verb now? We're
oh,
Zooming.
everything in English, because at least especially in American English, becomes a verb very quickly. But so anyway,
go ahead.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're gonna and our way through the intellectual life. Say we could make a verb out of and. No, I was just gonna append a footnote to that, which I think is an extraordinarily important point, and that is that I think there's always been a kind of unclarity in let's say modern science, from way back, about the relationship between mathematics and physics, if you want to put it like that. So Aristotle distinguishes the two. Obviously, what he means by physics is perhaps slightly different from what a lot of people today might think physics is, but still, it's a kind of study of the natural world and all of that. It's about matter, it's about motion, et cetera, right? So, I mean, materially speaking, we're talking about the same thing, basically. And he's saying, look, physics isn't mathematics, mathematics isn't physics. And the reason is that physics precisely has to do with matter and motion. And it's not an easy question to sort of determine, the extent to which and in what sense and with what sort of epistemological kind of charge you can mathematicize matter and motion, right? That's a huge question, but it seems like there's a real unclarity about that. And one of the ways that the unclarity goes or is sort of resolved is in the direction of a kind of collapse of physics into mathematics. And it seems to me that what Conor is talking about is a kind of extreme form of that collapse, right? But what's interesting is precisely that the physical sort of reasserts itself and says, hey, no, this isn't working, guys. This can't be what physics is.
Yeah, can I just chime in? I mean, I love that, Adrian. It seems to me that it's always a matter of leaving something really, really important behind that's inconvenient when you're trying to mathematicize everything, right? Right. So it's
yeah, exactly.
yeah. So
it's like when you're putting your car back together, Howsare, and there's bits and pieces you don't know what the hell to do with. You just throw them aside.
Yeah. I've had that experience, by the way, but we were, I mean, at one point, I think we're going to maybe try to link this with kind of the modern university, but if you think about it, all of the disciplines, of course, are chasing this chimera, right? This thing called science, and all of them that then do the same thing. I mean, Larry and I were unfortunate enough to go to sort of ordinary Jesuit, graduate programs where we never talked about God, because that's hard to talk about if all you want to talk about are like the facts of like whether, as Hauerwas puts it, whether Abraham was an ass nomad or a camel nomad, right? So it was like when you get in class and we would talk about facts, like did Augustine say X about Y? But when you came down to the question of like, well, does Augustine help us get to the truth of the matter of this or that? That now gets like, we don't, that was an uncomfortable conversation because we had gotten so used to domesticating theology. Theology had become about theology and not about God. And I think what we're saying here is there's something analogous about the way science has become about.
And there's no object. There's no object.
Yeah.
And anyway, I mean, what they call facts are like stills from a movie, except that you don't know what the movie is.
Yes.
So it's like context of stills, and so there's a bit of a kind of constructedness there that sort of weights things in a certain direction as well, right?
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that theology came about theology, even as Hauerwas might have it, out of a disguised form of cowardice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that if love drives out fear, fear drives out love, and I think not only about God but about creation. And all that entails. And I think that there was a rearguard retreat, if you like, into, again, we almost became like string theory.
Yes.
in that we could get our Eucharist here and our baptism here, Eucharist, and we did all nice and consistent, but it wasn't telling me anything about the tree outside my window.
Exactly.
And so it became its own form of Sudoku, and I think that it was a form of cultural cowardice, and it almost like was produced by the Yale and the Wittgensteinian sort of language games and so forth, and I suppose Wittgenstein and Derrida and all that rubbish infected the imaginations of theologians, and they thought, well, we can have our language game,
right?
So that's all right. So this is sort of a ghetto, and
exactly.
I think it became stillborn and impoverished.
And we never have to embarrass ourselves by claiming that God has anything to do with the physical world. It's kind of like those we've all heard the homily, right? Well, the real miracle, the real the real miracle was the whatever, right? As if it would be impossibly vulgar on God's part to sort of have anything to do with the physical world, either naturally or supernaturally.
Right. And which it was kind of my point before about the thing that sort of binds modernity together is all of these utterly naturalistic presumptions and assumptions. And you see this in biblical exegesis as well. Exactly. Jesus could not possibly really multiplied physically loaves and fishes. It was the miracle of sharing. There's the real miracle right there.
What's the miracle of it? The miracle of it is that, which I think it was, which one of the medievals called miracles prima natura, first nature, which I always love that miracles. But the thing about the loaves that I was teaching my students is brilliant, because he doesn't use Deliveroo. He doesn't just magic up food. He uses the natural, elevated. Likewise, there are two rubs on this, to quote the Bard. He walks on water. He doesn't float above it.
Exactly.
And what secularity does, when he walks on it, it's brilliant. They go, well, why didn't he run? I mean, nothing's enough for humans.
Right.
Well, he walk.
That sounds like a Monty Python skit. That's
great. I know. Yeah. Well, why is he? They couldn't run, eh?
Yes.
All right.
That's really. But can I just?
It's like a fish after resurrection. It's the same. It's the other way around. Just
exactly. And I mean the thing. So right, which points to. Right, like I read, there was this great line. I've just been reading, The City of God, and I'm almost done with it.
Wow!
But there's this brilliant line where Augustine, and here you could quote a bunch of other people who say similar things, but it's sort of like he talks about the God who created the world and then liberated it from corruption. So, right, it's sort of Conor's point that it's. Like Athanasius says, right? The point of the miracles is to show that the Redeemer is the creator. But that sort of suggests another dimension of this, which is implicit in what we've been saying, which is that precisely God has something to do with the physical world from the get-go.
Yes.
And so the point so this takes us then back to our kind of science and religion stuff, that it's not that naturalism actually delivers nature. It's not that and then so we have that, and then we have to sort of plead as theologians or plead as Christians for crumbs from the table, right? It's that there's the concreteness of the world, the sort of full actuality of nature comes to light, in the presence of God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have to say, this is something Conor over the years has really helped me to see that the burden of proof, right, is exactly the opposite of where we think it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's exactly the opposite of where we think it is, right? And I think that's something that Chesterton really understood so well as well.
Yes. Yeah. And Schmemann.
Yeah.
Yes. And yes.
And that's the truth, because they're sort of, yeah. I mean, I think that on the one hand, the linguistic retreat into the ghetto of theology, where it's only self-referential, is a plague on that house. And the other hand, the deferential, the crumbs, the deferential approach, obsequious toward science, it's fool's gold, because you're not gonna find anything to be deferential to. Yet the third aspect of that is, if you actually ignore all this and actually look at some practices of science, you will find real magic there.
Yep.
Exactly.
I mean, real cause for wonder. If you circumvent the ideologies, the science and the religions, almost do an immanent analysis, in a Blondelian sense, in that sense. And as you look at what can I tell this, condensed matter physics or something like that, you think, wow, this is just nuts.
Exactly.
It's fantastic. And it summons wonder. So if you actually look at how it actually plays itself out, not necessarily how it articulates itself in posters or in conference things, but actually in its immanent practice, you will see so much there to be beholden to. I mean, it's beautiful.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Conor, but could you give us an example of what you're talking about? Where if
let me just for your viewers, let me give you a quick historical thing, because Walker and I know this, but maybe people don't. Then I'll come to example back to my P45. So in America, for example, there was just to give you, because people really don't know what science is these days, so it's just good to give a quick skinny. So, for example, physics is like the master discourse nowadays, right? And then chemistry and biology are sort of cousins in the countryside, and but the physics are the posh people, and then they're divided into two apartheid groups, which is the high energy and low energy, right? So in the 80s in America, there was a huge fight between two Nobel laureates, one high energy laureate, one low energy laureate. One was Philip Anderson, and the other one was Stephen Weinberg, right? And they had a huge fight over the funding for your collider. You're going to have a hadron collider like we have in Switzerland, and now. And Anderson came in and fought against it, and Weinberg came in the other side. It went to congressional. You can actually buy a book on it. It went to Congress all the way, and Anderson won. And you guys don't have your collider as the one you wanted. Anyway, that was a huge divide, because the high energy physics, they were the aristocrats, and they thought they were going to come up with a theory of everything. And really anything you did entailed them. They were the king. And Anderson was having any of it. And then, but even though they lost that fight, throughout the 90s especially, all string theorists and all these types of high energy physics got all the kudos, all the money. They got the tenure. They got the research leave. They got everything, because they were the daddy. They were Elvis. They were the king. And then what you had is there was further internecine warfare, not between low energy and high energy, but within high energy, where everyone sort of woke up one day with a really big hangover and went, you just had 15 years of billions of pounds and tons of kudos and tenure and research. And they went there and there was nada. And that became then not the war between low and high energy, but called the string wars. Wow. And there was huge internecine warfare. And then what happened at the third tranche, if you like, the third chapter, is that string theory and quantum loop went, right, what are we going to do with this, lads? Because we actually, the cupboard is actually literally bare. There isn't any object, Larry. And so they thought, flip me. And here comes back to our P45, the unemployment ticket. They came back down to earth and used themselves as what's called a toolbox to analyze condensed matter physics. And these very intelligent people and their thoughts actually found application in the lab looking at stuff. And it was able to reveal this, back to your point, your question, Larry, incredible aspects of matter we just did not know, and which our fictions had been built upon erroneous impressions that matter was inert, that matter was simple, that matter was a given, that matter was static, that matter was whatever, dull. And what they found with different techniques is that all manner of what they call themselves, not me, this is not my term, exotic phases of matter became apparent And lo and behold, our entire understanding of matter for the next 300 years was thrown out of the window.
Wow.
It became more exotic, more mad than any miracle.
Right.
It's just, I mean, it's just crazy what's happening in the labs now. From high energy superconductors, semiconductors to quantum phases of matter, it's just mad. And Walker and I have talked about this, and I'm not quite sure about this, and I totally believe in it. Don't mean that. I'm wondering is our surprise at it. So I'll give you an example. If you have matter, right, and you have thermal energy, yeah, just the heat and stuff, latent energy and all that. If you turn that down, right, if you dampen it, what becomes apparent? All manner of birds coming fluttering out, and you start to see matter in whole new ways that you can't see unless you turn the volume down. In this case, temperature. So the thermal fluctuation, energy goes to zero, and suddenly matter discloses itself in such exotic, elegant ways that defy all our logic.
Wow.
So, for example, the way it went through with semiconductors, for example, you had something called BCS and Cooper pairing. That was the first thing of semiconductors, which is really cool. But it was a bottom-up way of thinking. Then you had the Russian lad, Landau, who's brilliant, who Stalin actually stuck in prison. And then he put his other scientist to work on it. And the scientist went, mate, I can't do it without that lad in prison. So he got Landau out of prison after a year, thank goodness. And he invented Landau symmetry breaking. And then spontaneous symmetry breaking, which explained matter in so many ways, to the point that scientists, there's a top down. And scientists went, flip me, this is magic. And it's so successful, they all thought, this must explain everything. But no, it was only the beginning. Back to turning the temperature down, what you have now is this huge growth in completely bizarre forms of matter, bizarre to us, bizarre forms of matter, which are called topological phases of matter, where there's no, we think of a base, like matter's down here, but no, it's long-range correlations, so it's globally dominated. The shape of the matter is dominated globally, not particulate down here. And this dictates the shape of matter.
Right.
So it's working at a meta level just to manifest the matter in this way. And they realized they had to go beyond symmetries, because the symmetries, that these topological orders, phases of matter, are different to the symmetries. So it's beyond Landau. It's just getting crazier. So the myth that matter is inert, the myth that matter is simple, the myth that matter is explained is nonsense. My only misgiving is that I said to Walker a while back, I wonder, is it that just exotic for us? In that I said, I wonder, do honeybees, something like the fractional quantum Hall effect, which is an example of topological matter. Right. And I'm thinking, well, maybe honeybees just see it all the time, but they find water bizarre. And we find water H2O, which we shouldn't actually. We should find water bizarre too. But anyway, we tend to domesticate it. But maybe it's an epistemological thing, and I hate epistemology, but it's a very Protestant thing. Because they take solace in epistemology. They go, oh yeah, but epistemology can't prove that, therefore we're all right being Protestants. I hate that. I like metaphysics.
Right.
Of which epistemological knowledge is a tributary, but the reservoir is first philosophy. Yes, I just wonder that. But yeah, so I think our narratives about science, our understanding, our deference, obsequiousness, and so forth, our ideology of it is completely for the birds, if not for the worms. And it doesn't exist. That science that we think exists literally doesn't exist.
That's the key. Can I chime in here? I mean, Connor, Connor, that was brilliant. And I mean, I could sit here and listen to you all day.
Me too. Yeah.
But I actually think that science in that sense has never existed. Not just that it existed until now and then has been sort of shown by the phenomena not to have existed. I mean, because it's never been the case. So in other words, that people usually, right, we all sort of assume this story, right? There was a scientific revolution in the 17th century and they got rid of final causes and the Aristotelian apparatus and finally figured out how to make stuff work. And it's kind of sad maybe that they got rid of the old stuff because it was much more poetic. But the new stuff works, and you can't deny that, right? So we're sort of stuck. But the fact of the matter is that the sort of Baconian ideal, if you want to call it that, first of all, was never proved. And it's not necessary, and never has been necessary, to account for reality or for how science or the sciences operate. And it seems to me that given that that's the case, we should expect that the historical record is actually a lot different from that. In other words, that it actually hasn't been this triumphant march of sort of Baconian, knowledge is power, but that in fact what you're going to find is an ongoing debate or set of debates between people who maybe think like that and other people who disagree either partly or wholly. And it's always going to be a sort of, and then there's going to be like all of the mess of, discovery that sort of oozes through these kind of airtight compartments that are created. And so the thing is going to look like, I think all the way through, it's going to look like an analog of what we've got now, is all I want to say.
Can I just back that up a second? Because that's one of the things, I think we have a cognitive disposition to fall into that trap. So when I said to you, for example, there's topological things, blah, blah, blah. I even wrote this the other day, in that we actually, we're quite limited in our thinking there. We fall into the narrative of thinking this is a new thing,
right? Rather
than disclosing that embarrassingly we've been wrong for centuries,
exactly,
if not forever.
Right, and there've always been all these people within the guild, even itself, who have kind of seen holes in the emperor's clothes, or seen that there are, right? In other words, so like, for example, like modern biology, right? It's by no means all this sort of reductionistic stuff. I mean, I don't mean just what stuff that's coming to light now, but I just mean, there have always been these figures who have sort of said, hey, wait a minute, and they've all been like somebody like, what's his name? Like Conway Morris or whatever, or Morris Conway, right?
Conway Morris, yeah.
Right. There've always been these people who are like, wait a minute. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up Conway Morris, man. I haven't heard that name in a while.
What were you going to say, Connor?
Go ahead.
I was saying Goethe was already a prophet for that.
Well, Goethe, exactly.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I was going to bring him up as a perfect example of what Adrian's talking about here, going all the way back. But is there not, at the same time, let's just put it this way, just on the level of popular perception, even among academics, even amongst, and perhaps precisely amongst academics, that science is in fact channelized according to certain well-established models, Big Bang theory, neo-Darwinism, string theory, whatever, and that this is where all the money has flowed, and that's why these things have become sort of standard models. But it's been I interviewed a guy last week, Mark Stallman. Adrian, you know Mark Stallman.
Yes, he's great.
But it was a fascinating interview with Mark. Mark knows a lot about digital technology and about science and these issues. But he pointed out that precisely the problem that we're seeing on this level of modern science is simply perceived in the popular consciousness is that it has all been thrown into crisis, that all of the standard models have been thrown into crisis. And I think this is sort of what Conor's bringing up as well.
Yeah. Walker and I have told us we've been working on something, but absolutely. I mean, this is what the window dressing and the window are two different things. Right. I mean, when you look through the window, it's completely, I don't mean Christ. I mean, I love it. I just don't like its ideology. And I don't like the public perception of it. Right. And I don't like theologians' perception of it. Exactly. I mean, I was in a Viva yesterday examining someone's PhD. And the external examiner beside me, she said, at the beginning, she said, well, what are you doing? I said, I'm working on this thing, blah, blah. I said, I'm doing stuff in physics or whatever it was. And this theologian turns out, who's specialist in the Eucharist or something, turns around to me and says, so you have a science degree then? And I went,
Yeah, exactly.
no, I don't. I'm self-taught. I'm an autodidactic. No. But that was the cultural response.
Exactly.
I mean, the point is, scientists don't know what they're doing.
Exactly.
And also, they don't quite often know how they're doing it.
Exactly.
And because of those two lacks, they kidnap it and stick it into silos where it does not belong.
Exactly.
Because it's easier to cater to it. It's easier to manage it.
Exactly.
And as for crisis, I mean, that's one thing. It's back to the quantum field thing. I mean, it's so hidden from the public,
right,
how much they just don't know, and how much even that which Walker talks about working, they don't know why it works or how it works. I mean, but there's a pretense that they do for funding purposes, for public perception. It's a posturing.
Exactly.
And again, I stress, I love it all. I just don't like its presentation.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, and it's true. I mean, I'm sure that it would be part of, you know, a sort of good historical account of the last 300 or 400 years to highlight the fact that there is a kind of persistent tendency to Baconize, you know, and then to sort of present, you know, science in these sort of inflated terms and all of that. My point is just that it's important to acknowledge both the factical influence of that Baconianizing hype, and at the same time not to concede that it's ever managed to colonize things completely, because if we do that, then we're basically capitulating to it. We're basically saying that, oh yeah, actually the magicians who don't know how their magic tricks work actually can do all of this, and they actually do know how it works, and reality might actually really be like that. I mean, so I think it's really important. So it's not about sort of being optimistic or being positive, right? Because people say, oh, you know, don't be a tech doomer, you know, don't be down on science and everything. I mean, that may be true, right? And there may be reasons for not being like that. But the point that I'm making is not so much that. It's that if you do embrace a kind of sort of doom narrative that it's just all been Bacon all the way down for, you know, for the last 400 years, and that's it, how do you not then end up agreeing that that kind of Baconianizing ideal is actually correct? Because if it's that powerful and really goes all the way down like that and just dominates everything, you know, every waking minute, then how is it not cleanly replaced reality?
Right. Well, could I just come in, because it didn't work.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It was still born before it was born.
It was just ideology, and the removal of, as you say, Aristotelian apparatus, you know, final and formal. That was just pretense. It was never removed.
It's never. You can't. You can't.
It's impossible.
There's no efficacy without finality,
and there's no scientist.
Exactly.
Well, just look at the reigning. Look at some of the reigning sort of writings among the neo-Darwinists. Leon Kass pointed this out in his book Toward a More Natural Science, where he points out that Darwinian biologists simply cannot avoid the language of teleology, no matter how hard they try to expunge teleology from their descriptions of how evolution works. It always has this tendency to slip in through the back door again.
Well, you can't, because the point is, I mean, something that's really become very clear to me, and maybe I've said it in one of my previous appearances here. I mean, it's literally true 100% of the time that there's no efficacy without finality.
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, it's as simple as that. Or formal, right? I mean, for the same for similar reasons.
Well, all the causes hang together, right? You take one away, they all fall apart.
Yes, but the because the sort of the kind of Baconianizing mode sort of rests on the assumption that there's such a thing as processes that sort of, you know, are driven forward, say, by a kind of deterministic causality.
Yeah.
That can exist and be ordered and be understood completely apart from any consideration of form or finality. And that's just simply not true. And so the point is that can't work on its own terms, and never has worked on its own terms, and never could be an explanation of how anybody discovered anything under the banner of modern science.
It's precisely because, too, I mean, it's a mistake to then say, well, what Baconian science was about was it just emphasized efficient causality and got rid of the other cause. No, it's not even about efficient causality in the classical sense of what we mean. And so what your point is, Adrian, I think is well taken, that even on the level of the sort of Baconian notion, it barely rises to the level of a description of a real cause, which is why it's never really been very effective. You know, as an explanatory tool.
Right. This is an implication that I mean, efficient causality, even billiard ball, what they call billiard ball causation, is about communicating being.
Bingo.
It's not primarily about pushing something and forcing it to do something.
Hey, Howsare, do you have 2 cents?
No, I was just going to say that this kind of takes us back to the beginning of the conversation when you talk about the attempt to mathematize reality is precisely to abstract, Adrian, from all the other things that are happening when we see something like a purely mechanistic cause, right? You have to bracket off so much stuff to talk about that but you can't really in reality do that, right? Yeah. So you're always importing. It's kind of like the historical critical scholar of the Bible trying to be simply a historical critical scholar. He never succeeds in doing that because there's always he's always backloading in stuff that is not.
And even mathematics is teleological because there's a direction. There's a direction.
I mean, we shouldn't make enemies here. I mean, mathematics is beautiful, and it's a beautiful
absolutely picture. It's glorious.
And so we shouldn't blame the tool for how it's used.
No, right. Not at all. Not at all.
Likewise, mechanism, because if you look how a mechanism works, it entails much more abundance.
Absolutely.
Than the straw version of mechanism. So we got to be careful what we set up as enemies, because these aren't enemies.
I agree.
They're actually allies. It's just the way they're presented seems to be, it generates the full animosity. Mechanism can be really sexy.
No, can I say something about that? I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is just so exciting. I mean, it's hard to shut up, but it's
especially you're talking about sexy mechanisms and stuff. Yeah.
Well, I think there's 2 different things here, right? But both of which can be retrieved. So one of them is the analogy between machines and natural entities, right? So first of all, machines are wonderful, and there's something really illuminating about the analogy between machines and natural processes, right? If you know what you're doing, as Conor says, right? If you know how to present these things. But then the other thing, I think at the core of kind of mechanism is the sense that causality, efficient causality, is a form of necessitation, right? And this just raises, but this raises another thing that I think is retrievable, which is that both Plato and Aristotle in different ways say that there's a positive relationship between the good and the necessary. So Plato, for example, in the Phaedo, right, sort of talks about how there's the good and then sort of that without which the good can't be realized, right? And Aristotle has a magnificent discussion in book 2 of the Physics about teleology and necessity. And there's this beautiful mystery in the fact that the realization of the good depends on things, right? And therefore requires certain things that have to be given, right? And it seems to me that in their having to be given, right, you have the matrix of what we think of as mechanical necessity or deterministic necessity, right? So you can retrieve even that, right? And you can see it as part of this kind of mysterious, kenosis of the good, which is part of its goodness and all of that.
But even us, even as humans, I mean, we're taught to pray for our daily bread out of necessity.
Totally.
And I always point out to some of my more evangelical students that talk about, oh yes, but man does not live by bread alone, but by the word, every word that proceeds from the mouth. And I go, yeah, man does not live by bread alone, but bread as well.
Exactly. No, that's the thing. I think this, it applies all the way up and down.
I mean, and you can see there's a symptom of our cultural malaise, because again, I don't think it's the tools. I think it's the humans who are contorting what is actually occurring before our eyes. Right. So we're making it into the porn movie that it is, the ideological porn movie, which of course is going to be a fiction, because porn's a fiction. Ideologies are a fiction. All these things actually don't exist in real life.
That's right.
Literally, they don't.
That's right.
There's no porn star. No porn stars ever existed in the world. It's a person pretending to be something. Science pretending to be something. A mechanism pretending to be mechanistic in some pretended way.
Exactly.
Us pretending we don't need daily bread. I mean, it's rubbish. It's just rubbish. We get above ourselves and think we're angels.
That's it.
But I mean, it's even the questions that Walker and I've been talking about before. But you'll hear. I just think that the academy and theologians, philosophers, just bark up so many wrong trees. I mean, Walker and I have been talking about things like reduction and emergence. I mean, they're just both rubbish terms. I mean, they're just rubbish. I mean, you talk about crises, Larry, and let's say someone says to you in a class, right, or say it goes, well, do you think, is there such a thing as emergence, right? And then you have all this debate. It's so embarrassing. I think I'm going to go red, actually. I mean, we know that the standard model is emergent. So the most successful physics model is emergent.
Yes.
Space-time is emergent. So anything you'd reduce one emergent to another is already you're reducing one emergent to another emergent.
Emergent, yeah.
And then you end up this massive functionalism in physics, where it's really funny because it replicates Descartes. This is really fun. So you end up having space-time as the res cogitans, because it's the emergent, and something underlying, which is the more final theory, which is the res extensa. And never the twain shall meet. So we get this Cartesianism replicated in physics.
Yeah.
So when someone says to you, is there emergent? Well, I think, we're here, aren't we? I mean, it's just nonsense. There's no such thing as a reductive base. Right. Quite literally.
Yeah. It's emergence all the way down. Is that
all the way down? So to say there's something emergent is already to sup with the devil.
Right.
You've given up the ghost, if you like, already, because you've bought into a bad rubric, a bad grammar of actually how to approach the question.
Right. Yeah, there was this time when there wasn't anything emergent, but then something emerged out of this non-emergent baseline reality that doesn't really have any reality.
But it can't have a non-emergent because of the Big Bang, for example. So how are we going to have a non-emergent?
Yeah, exactly.
And after all, Walker and I were saying, one of the quips I try to sum it up with, no boom, no bang. So we don't know. It's back to Aristotle and Plato. We don't say you got some quark, right? Whichever flavor, a quark. Well, the quark doesn't know what it's until there's a boom, a tree rocks up, or a planet, or a star, or whatever. It ain't nothing yet. just in potency. So without the boom, there ain't no bang, a whimper.
Right.
So only retroactively can we say, oh, those quarks were pretty sexy. They were able to do all these palm trees, like in Florida. Only retroactively do we know whether there was a bang because of the boom. And they go hand in hand.
Exactly.
Like form and matter. And they are never the twain, Jimmy, because they are principles in that sense. And also, if you think about it, there's nothing more reductive than theology. Creation ex nihilo. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, even under anthropology, the name of your podcast, for example, I mean, you got form and matter as two co-principles, which are reducible, or rather have the anchor in the actus ascendi. Without that, they come into actuality through the act of being.
Right.
So in that sense, form and matter essence are reduced to that act.
Yeah.
So reduction is exactly also emergent or creation. Right. So the terms we're using we're doing so in a crude manner, and we're actually doing it through borrowed ideologies. We're not actually being innocent on how we're looking at it and standing back. I mean, creation ex nihilo, that's reductive in spades.
Yeah.
But you remove the inferences.
Yeah.
You expunge them.
Exactly.
Sorry.
No, I was just thinking about what you said about quarks as well. And there's another way in which you see an interplay of the reductive and the emergent, because so on the one hand, you know, the potency isn't going to be sort of crystallized in the direction of quarks unless there's a whole that comes into being with a kind of, you know, entirety of actuality. And yet that whole depends on its parts, you know, and whatever is part-like in it. And there's something beautiful about that dependence as well, right? So
beautiful.
And there's a kind of reductio there. I mean, and so maybe part of the problem is not seeing that the core meaning of reductio is being led back to a principle that lets be, rather than sort of absorbs tyrannically, but also that there just as there are, you know, different kinds of causing, there are different kinds of reductio, right? That there is a way that the whole can be reduced to its matter because the whole depends on it. Just like there's a way that the parts can be reduced to the whole because they won't be crystallized in that way unless there's a whole for them to be crystallized as parts of, and so on.
I'll give you one example of that. And Walker and I have talked this before. Think about a quark, right? You see, there's so many elephants in the room and we just don't spot them. And we say, like, shall we reduce the whole to the parts, right? But the parts themselves are, right. Take a quark. A quark is already a type. Have you heard of molecular turnover? Do you know what molecular turnover is? You know the way, if I meet you in 3 years, Larry, not one atom of you will remain.
Yes, exactly.
Molecular turnover. Well, just take that logic and transfer it to the particulate. Any quark is a type. It's a form. Yeah. Which is only filled, the cells of which are filled by that which comes in and that which leaves, allowing it to be quark. The quark is already so that which you reduce to, think, oh, it's big base power, is already a form. Yeah. And the form only is when it's actualized by the parts that enter in its molecular turnover. It's particulate turnover in this case. Yeah. There's no such thing as a particle in the way we generally understand it at all. Right. Yeah. Demonstrably so. But we are so stupid that we don't understand that. You can't find a quark. Right. A quark will always be a type. Exactly. And there's no quark outside the type. Exactly. Yeah, types depend on other types. Yeah. No, because it's sort of like, so when people say the quark, they don't mean this little chunk of stuff here. You can't mean that, because you couldn't identify it. If you just meant the chunk in a sort of abstract way, you could never identify it. It's better to borrow the term from chemistry. You know this term, you probably it's a better to think of quark as an affordance.
Yes, precisely. That's it.
So whichever flavor a quark is, or a muon, or whichever, or anion. Anions are very interesting, by the way, guys. Back to the fractional Coulomb-Fow effect. They're compressed fermions, and they do all the sexy topological stuff. But anyway, but do we only know them because of what they're affording? It's about affordance. So we only retroactively go, oh, there's that flavor of quark, there's that flavor of quark, there's a muon, because it's affording us a certain behavior.
Exactly.
At the particulate level. And the best way of sobering up in this way, and I know that students make this a very hippie thing, but I actually think there's a lot of truth to this. In William Blake's, Innocence, Auguries of Innocence, Infinity in My Hand, that poem of his. If you actually look at it, he's got it right. Because we think Everest is really high and a quark is really small, but that's not true metaphysically. It is, that's us being parochial and colloquial. I don't think Everest is any bigger than a quark, if big be a value axiological thing.
Right.
Yeah. I just don't think it is, but we tend to be obsessed by the very small or short distance and actually deem it more important. And then the big be sort of gross and reducible to this, which is very small. It's just nonsense. I mean, it is infinite grain of, or what is it? Infinite grain of sand or whatever it is. It's definitely there. I mean, you look at it and you do have, I mean, Borges is good in this too, the Argentinian writer. And they're definitely onto something. And it's just our perspectivalism, a parochialism, here epistemological, like epistemology, that traps our imagination.
Yeah, I think, I mean, a guy who in modern thought who really understood that well, although again, I think you just need Plato, Aristotle, and Aquinas to really work it out, is Leibniz, right? I mean, everything is intermured in everything else.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Leibniz says it quite clearly.
Yeah.
Quite clearly. And he's got some beautiful passages on that.
Yeah.
Really
He's
beautiful.
wonderful on that.
Yeah.
And it also reminded me, Conor, when you were talking, it just reminded me of this, another wonderful passage in, book 22 of On the City of God, in which Augustine is sort of, is answering these objections posed by the pagans to the notion of the resurrection, right? Because if you,
book 22 is very important.
Yeah, if you think of it in a sort of too crude way, obviously, you do run into some absurdities, right? And he's showing that no, you don't have to think of it in that too crude way, but yet it's very physical, it's very real, But one of the things that he says in that context, which is exactly along the kind of lines of what you're saying, is he sort of seems to be thinking of matter sort of in itself as something that's ready to play all of the different parts that are required of it.
Yeah.
And that's really the point. So that when we're talking about, the hand or the brain or the quark or the gene or whatever it is, I mean, it's not that we're not talking about something that is embodied or is body-like somehow. I mean, even if only just in the imagination. But we're talking about precisely something that's embodied, namely a form and a function, right? And the function has to do with the form, and the form has to do with the function. And so that behind that, so that matter in its core is this readiness. It is the Platonic receptacle. I mean, Plato even says in the Timaeus, right? It's not that he says the receptacle is not, it's even prior, it's not the elements. It's not even the elements. The elements aren't the receptacle yet. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's already there waiting for the dance.
Exactly.
It's already, and even a nod to the perichoratic notion of dance etymologically, it's already waiting for that. And it's desiring form, as Aquinas clearly says.
Exactly.
And it also is a co-principle of form. And also back to the Baconian thing, you were saying about brain-like, quark-like. Right. You better always, because of the Baconian thing, if they were consistent, they'd only end up with aggregation.
Exactly.
And you wouldn't get your brain or your hand or everything.
Precisely.
And you're actually back to affordances. You're better talking about quarking,
Right,
and handedness,
exactly,
and brainness, and
exactly.
because if you sped it up, it's already dynamic. We just don't see it in the parochial terms.
Exactly.
It's already molecular term. Everything's changing, but the form is keeping it a non-identical repetition.
That's it, and that's really what you just said illuminates, for example, why Aristotle seems to identify being and form. Right? It's not about some preference for you know, the purely invisible over the visible or something like that. It's exactly what you're saying. It's that it's the handing, thanks to which the potency of matter can be manifesting itself as a hand ongoingly in this dynamic.
That's why Aristotle, he talks about, and Aquinas following, that's why there's no corpse. And that's why a severed hand is no hand at all.
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's because for Aristotle, there's no such thing as matter in the way that we have presumed there is.
Precisely.
That's right.
Right. It's exactly
That's right.
That's exactly right. But right. In other words, it's back to your point about the mythical base, right? It's not an already formed or half formed something on which everything else is resting, right? It's not that at all. It's exactly the thing that comes into view as this kind of dynamic solidity, thanks to the handingness or the brainingness or the geningness or the quarkingness or whatever it is.
All affordances.
Yeah.
All affordances, because the dance of two co-principles.
Exactly.
Under the mandate, under the patronage of an actus essendi. That's what it is.
Exactly. Which is another kind of letting be of the whole, as well as a pulling of everything together.
And speaks to the fecundity of
Yes.
things, the giftedness of things, and thus points towards the mysterious abyss that generates all of this. I mean, I can't help but think of what little I know of Ferdinand Ulrich's philosophy of gift, that there is something here with regard to what Plato and Aristotle meant by matter, its consistency with our notions of form. These are all absolutely stunningly fascinating questions that stretch the mind to its limit. I know Rodney and I are enjoying just sitting back and watching you two brainiacs go at it here. This is just fun as hell, I gotta say. I mean,
just come back with one thing you're saying about the fecundity. Who would have thought that bread and wine could become body and blood in a sacrament?
Exactly.
Who could think that two people have sex and a life is born and it grows into a human being, right up to 80 years of age, and carries the same person who is the same person despite an uncountable change over decades. Exactly. Yet it's still Jimmy or Susie after 8 decades. Right. I mean, who could think that matter could be such, thus and so? I mean, that's why I said at the beginning that miracles should be thought of as first nature, not as something extrinsic to it, but only as a disclosing of its source and its finality.
Exactly. Well, and go ahead.
I was just thinking also liturgy, back to sacraments. This is what always struck me, and back to the body you were saying. I've always thought that the body, metabolism, circadian clock, the seasons, and so forth are analogous to the liturgy and the liturgical calendar, which has all three modalities of time simultaneously. It doesn't work in secular time. The departed are included, the yet to be are included, and the present is included, and the circadian metabolism of the liturgy throughout proper time speaks to biological time, chemical time, and physical time, because liturgy is actually a metaphysics. It's a disclosing.
Yeah. When
you have the Eucharist, right? It ain't something religious. It's a revelation of what is and why it is. Yeah, and if you're going to use your Larry, I don't know if you're over there on the left, the name of your podcast is exactly that.
Right.
Because Christ is revealing man to himself, right? Surely then Christ revealing himself in the sacrament is revealing creation to itself.
Yes.
Yes.
This is our metabolism, our
Yep.
circadian clock, and so forth. And I think sport can be like that too, actually. The strange form of liturgy of physics.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay. Rodney, go ahead.
yeah, no, just I was thinking about this in terms of this, you know, they always do these surveys periodically to find out how many Catholics believe in the real presence or whatever. And they get these, you know, very, very bad, you know, numbers back. 75% of Catholics don't believe Christ is present in the Eucharist. And then, so our bishop, God bless him, he's a great guy, but he means well, but he's very upset about this. So he's trying to have these, like, you know, blitzkrieg sort of events to try to, you know, have people teach the people, you know, what it means to say that Christ is present. And precisely what you guys are talking about is the problem. It's not so much that the people can't believe in the miraculous. It's that they think that nature is this really dull, lifeless thing in itself, right? So in other words, well, that's just bread and wine. How can it be the body? And the point you want to say is, no, it's not just bread. It's life-giving by its nature.
Just get rid of the word just.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. That's right. It's already
wow, it's bread and wine.
Yes, yes,
Right.
that's where they don't have.
Well, it goes to Rodney. That goes to Schmeemann's point. You know that when God created water, He created it for baptism first.
That's what Connor's saying. It reveals the meaning of what it is.
Yeah.
You know, in it. Yeah.
And also, Rodney, when there's incredulity amongst the flock as such, you know, my students and stuff, I go, well, if you're incredulous about bread and wine, right, being a real presence and so forth, well, yeah, but then I'm going to have the same Eucharistic problem with you. Because you're then on that register only atoms and molecules. I don't think you've a real presence, Jimmy or Susie.
Right.
So
That's
they
right.
are becoming so humans become, a Spain, if you're going to mention him, an anthropomorphism to themselves, and they're actually guilty of a form of docetism.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Everybody's frozen here.
Molecules.
Okay.
So that's just bread and wine. Jimmy, you're just molecules, mate. Let's go Zwinglian on you. Zwinglian metaphysics. And I'm here with Flannery O'Connor. I'm with Flannery O'Connor on this. If it's just symbolic, to hell with it.
Right.
Because the Zwinglian metaphysics will spread from the Eucharist to our anthropology.
Yes. Yep. Yes.
You know what's interesting about that Flannery O'Connor quote? When Flannery got done saying, if it's a symbol, then to hell with it, she said, that was all the defense I was capable of, but I realize now that this is all I will ever be able to say about it outside of a story, except that it is the center of existence for me. All the rest of life is expendable. That part of her quote about if it's just a symbol, then to hell with it, is always sort of left off. And that is that in reality, the only thing that she cares to know about it is that it is the totalizing explanation of her life. That the reason why the Eucharist is more than just a symbol, even though it is a symbol, is precisely as it penetrates to her core and explains absolutely everything about everything.
Well, it's a symbol in the Greek sense.
Yes, exactly. A symbolon. Yes.
Diabolical. The Greek sense of putting together, absolutely. But then it puts together something real. so something really is put together, just like a human is put together, knit together, as it says in the scriptures, knit together in the womb and so forth. And I think the congregation, the flock, the parishioners, if they want to be incredulous about the Eucharist, they're going to be equally as incredulous about themselves.
Yeah.
Because if it's just bread and wine, they're just atoms.
Yep.
And, you know, just a kind of a side note, right? I mean, you know, sometimes the doctrine of transubstantiation is presented both by friends and foes as if it meant that there was a kind of that sort of like the one substance gets removed and then replaced with another substance. Only now the natural connection between substance and accidents is missing, and so you have this new substance with this screen of the old accident formed by the old accident sort of floating above. And I mean, I think what you have to say is both that that in a certain sense, the unity between the accidents of bread and wine and the substance of Christ's body and blood in one way is even closer and more intimate than the relationship between the substance of the bread and the wine and its accidents. That's the point. So in other words, yes, there's a way in which the accidents are upheld by the risen Lord, who is a life-giving spirit, right? And he's sort of upholding things as a vehicle of his own most personal self-gift. Absolutely. So and that's right. But there's even an analog to that in the relationship between substance and accidents in the nature. But at the same time, that there's a kind of sort of pneumatic hyper inherence of the accidents in this self-giving person, who's able to be wholly present in all of them and in each part of them, in a way that sort of fulfills the way in which a substance is normally, in its essence, wholly present in all of all of its accidents and in each of them, right? In a kind of self-giving gesture already on the natural level.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. I like that. I'm going to have to transcribe that sometime, put it, and then plagiarize it.
What were you saying?
Anyway, I'm just wondering, is it the sense then the bread and the wine are actually eminently more bread and wine by becoming the sacrament?
Yes, exactly.
That's the point.
They already were held through held together in the verbum.
Exactly.
Therefore, so by being participant in the sacrament, they're becoming more natural.
Exactly. It's kind of like, I mean, it's sort of like, yeah, I mean, so another way of putting, I think the same insight, or at least one that's really related, is it's not an accident that Christ says, my blood, my flesh is true food. You can say it's the true food.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's not that the bread and wine are annihilated. That
right.
All the masters of theology say it's not annihilated. In one sense, they cease to exist, but they cease to exist in the way that bread and wine do when we consume them. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So they give way to this new substance, and lo and behold, this new substance is the true food. And then the accidents of bread and wine are still doing, and even more so, what they always did.
Yeah.
Which was mediate this nourishing substance.
Adrian, like the
way that I would put. That's the way that I would put it. I don't know, Connor, if you would accept that.
No, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. I mean, I think that. I mean, you're saying about us eating, consuming, imbibing wine and eating. It's taken up into us.
Yes,
and it nourishes us. But what's weird here is it's taken up
exactly
by its creator.
Precisely.
Right.
Exactly.
Who is not the pale imitation of it, but the reality of it. And we are only ever the imitation approaching it.
Exactly.
Sacramentally, it's finally bread and wine.
Yes. He's the ark. He both as divine word, right? He's the panis angelorum, and in his incarnate form is the reality of which bread and wine and wheat and grapes were always already the substantial, the sort of not I mean the symbol, right? I mean, and the symbolism always worked there through a kind of there's a kind of hidden substantiality that's manifesting itself in the accidents, right? And that very symbolic reality is itself symbolic of him who is the archetypal food and drink. And that all comes together in transubstantiation.
Because every other food, you know, it's only approaching the archetype, because every other food, you will eventually still go hungry.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this food makes us into food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This food, it doesn't, Christ doesn't digest us and then excrete us. I mean, he turns us into an extension of the living food that he is.
Yeah.
That's good. I like
So the
that.
glorified body, Adrian, you could do this all with that too, right? The new heavens and the new earth, right? As being not the annihilation of the old earth and the old body, right? But the it's coming into its own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like when Marilyn talk about Flannery O'Connor. I like Marilyn Robinson when she was asked, you know, what she thought about heaven, you know, what she thought it would be like. And she casually answered, like here, +1. I always love that. Because we don't know what it's so ambiguous, because +1, because it's not like bread and wine will go away. Or it's not like, but +1, it's so cleverly done, because you don't know what size +1 is. You know, it's very powerful. Because if it said +1,000,000, that'd be very small.
Yeah.
But by saying like here, +1.
Yeah.
It's very potent.
It is very potent.
It's very De Lubacian.
Like here and a trillion. That would be tiny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here,
Yeah, somewhere De Lubac is smiling down on all of us because, you know, I think his theology of nature and grace is sort of animating a lot of these conversations.
I tell you, you know, Larry, when I wrote my first book, I started writing it right beside where De Lubac started writing Surnaturel.
There you go. I knew you were a De Lubac guy, Connor. So that's why.
I'm literally a mile from where he started writing it.
Wow.
By the time I left, Adrian's mate was 3 doors up from me, Adrian von Schweier's nephew.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Did you ever have?
The day I met him, I happened to be reading Balthasar's epilogue, and he walked in and introduced himself, and he started talking to me about Herr Doctor, who had spilt coffee over his cassocks or whatever it was. I remember. Apparently, he's very patient when he did so.
Oh, wow. That's absolutely fascinating. Wow. Well, we've been at this about a little over an hour. Well, actually more than that, but it's just fascinating. But before we get away, and we can talk for however long you guys want, but before we
should do a part 2. I think
we should do a part 2. And perhaps part 2 could delve more deeply into how everything that we've said about science and metaphysics and theology and so forth here today, but especially about its significance with regard to this essentialized thing called science that doesn't really exist. How does this play out in a university setting? What are its implications? Go ahead.
Should we do it in part 2, or do you want to do it now?
I think part 2 would be great, because that's a big.
Yeah, let's do a part 2, because like I said, I mean, we've been going at this now about an hour and a half, so maybe that's quite long enough. All right, so I'll get a hold of all of you guys again, and we'll go from there. But I want to thank Connor especially for his genius in particular, and for cultivating his genius. I've been reading and following his stuff for many years from a distance as a great admirer. Adrian, it's always fantastic to hear from you, my friend.
And I'm sorry, I always sort of end up talking too much, but it's just hard to contain oneself, you know. And people like you guys are inspiring, you know, so it's actually all your fault.
No, I know. I meant when I said Rodney and I were very happy to sit back and watch you two guys have this brilliant conversation. And I know my viewers and listeners, I'm going to get a lot of emails now, tons of emails about how much they've enjoyed this. Rodney, as always, it's great, my old buddy, my old pal, to see you again, even with your obnoxious Floridian tan going, and you're surfing and grouper sandwiches and all that good stuff.
I had to change venues. My neighbor started hedging, and so I had to mute myself and come into the house. So
The toil and turmoil in Florida.
Exactly.
People actually work outside in Florida in the summer. That's amazing.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
All right. Well, stay tuned, everybody, for part 2, where we're going to talk about all of this and its implications for university in a university setting. Thanks to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, you guys are the best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
You guys.